Figalia Mukhanetsyana suddenly regained consciousness and started screaming after realizing she was lying in a coffin. Her relatives, who'd been grieving her death, were just as terrified. The woman was so shocked that she clutched at her heart and fell right back into the coffin. Figalia was immediately taken to the hospital, but she only lived for 12 more minutes in the intensive care unit, after which she died. As it turned out, before these events, the woman had gone unconscious due to pain in the chest. For some reason, the doctors concluded she wasn't breathing anymore, so her devastated relatives organized the woman's funeral. There, Figalia died, this time for real, because she saw her own burial being prepared. This sounds very strange, yet for this video, I've picked other cases of death that are just as paradoxical. But here comes the warning. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Late July 1985, a recreation center in New Orleans. Jerome Moody and other lifeguards arrived to celebrate an important professional event, the first season with no tragic incidents. That year, nobody had died in any of the city's 19 public pools. The lavish party had around 200 attendees. Everyone was having fun, but Jerome, for some reason, abstained from jumping into the water and participating in conversations. He was quietly standing aside, watching others enjoy themselves. The party was slowly coming to an end. The guests were leaving, and the 4 lifeguards on duty started cleaning the pool. Suddenly, one of them noticed with terror that there was a body lying at the bottom in the deep end of the pool. It was Jerome. None of the many lifeguards at the party noticed the man was in the water and needed help. Jerome was dragged out of the water. Resuscitation attempts ensued, but it was too late. No one could believe something like this could have possibly happened at a party celebrating a season without a single drowning, let alone to a lifeguard. This is hard even to imagine since the situation looks like an absolute paradox. So, no matter how good you are at swimming, do not go into the water under the influence of alcohol. However, lifeguarding is far from the only dangerous job. Working in factories or manufacturing can also be life-threatening. December 23rd, a kayak factory in Runcorn, England. Alan Catterall noticed a malfunction in a factory oven and decided to fix it quickly, without telling anyone. The operator didn't know there was a worker inside the oven and turned it on. It closed automatically and started heating up to 280 degrees Celsius. Alan was trapped. The factory noise left his screams for help unheard. Frantic, the man tried to free himself with a crowbar, but all his efforts were in vain. A few minutes later, Alan died of severe burns and shock in the very oven he'd been trying to fix and prevent from harming him. This case serves as yet another reminder of how important it is to adhere to strict safety protocols. However, even a creative profession can sometimes lead to an unexpected death. May 12, 1976, London, Great Britain. Keith Relf, vocalist of the legendary rock band The Yardbirds, was practicing his guitar, playing in the basement of his house. Suddenly, the musician accidentally stepped on a gas pipe, creating a deadly circuit. The electricity passed through his body, killing Keith on the spot. The musician lost his life because of his own guitar. Today, all guitar amplifiers are earthed to prevent a power buildup, but at the time, Keith Relf didn't have that. Always check electrical equipment and rehearse in safe locations. Never lose vigilance, as it's precisely carelessness that led to tragedies in the following stories. July 9, 1993, Toronto. Lawyer Gary Hoy, who worked for the prestigious Holden Day Wilson law firm, was showing a group of interns around the company's office on the 24th floor of Toronto Dominion Center. To impress his young listeners, Gary decided to do one of his signature stunts. With a running start, he'd slam his elbow against the window, trying to break it, but each time, both the glass and Gary remained intact. That time, when he ran and rammed his entire body against the window, the glass did not break. However, the frame yielded to the blow. With a horrible crackling sound, the window got torn out of the building, and Gary was taken with it. The witnesses were shocked by how quickly a pretend demonstration turned into a deadly tragedy. Engineers confirmed that standard construction norms did not provide for such extreme tests, so don't ever try to repeat this stunt. However, the habits of the next victim look worthy of imitation at first glance. July 20th, 1984, Vermont, USA. Jim Fixx, a famous long-distance running guru, was doing what he loved most, just like every day. Jim was the author of popular books and lectures that inspired countless people to abandon unhealthy habits and lead to an active life. Fixx was 52 years old, and in his opinion, running was the thing that helped him stay physically and spiritually healthy. However, on that day, his sports addiction became fatal. Suddenly, he stopped because of an intense pain in the heart area. The runner grabbed his chest and then dropped dead right there on the road. This tragedy sent a shockwave among his fans and joggers all over the world. How could somebody who had dedicated his life to health and fitness have died? As it turned out, Fixx had a hereditary predisposition to heart conditions. However, he'd also ignored warnings of possible health issues due to excessive exercise and even refused to undergo stress testing a few months before death. It's a medical test used to assess heart performance during physical activity. So don't forget to consult doctors, even if you believe you're completely healthy. However, some precautions apply to everyone. For instance, always wear a helmet when riding a motorcycle. This rule has long since been questioned by anyone, yet Philip Kontos was still against it. The man was known as a passionate proponent of freedom of choice for motorcyclists. He believed that everyone can decide for themselves when and how to ensure their own safety. In New York, on July 2nd, 2011, Philip and over 500 other motorcyclists took part in a ride protesting a law on the mandatory use of helmets. Kontos joined the bikers on his old Harley-Davidson manufactured in 1983. However, at some point, Philip, for some reason, lost control of the brakes. The bike started skidding, and Kontos was flung out of the seat, badly hitting his head on the concrete. Philip was quickly taken to the hospital, but it was too late. The injuries turned out deadly. A medical expert stated that if the man had been wearing a helmet, he would have most likely survived. This served as a shocking end to the motorcycle ride, whose participants had been fighting for the opposite idea. But even this is not the most bizarre example of a poorly thought-out risk. May 27, 2012, West Virginia, USA. In the Panther State Forest, believers in the inner circle of Pastor Mac Randall Wolford gathered to celebrate an annual service in nature. Mac Randall was known for holding his sermons with a live rattlesnake, whom he thought to be a symbol of his personal test of faith. The pastor was sure that God would keep him safe from danger. Wolford had this fascination instilled in him since childhood, since his father was also a pastor and died of a snake bite when Mac was just 15 years old. Despite this tragedy, the boy took on his father's heritage and continued the dangerous practice. On that day, Wolford was yet again dancing with a timber rattlesnake named Sheba. He wrapped the animal around his arm as he'd done so many times before. However, when the pastor put the snake on the ground, the reptile suddenly darted forward and bit him on the thigh. The spectators froze, watching Wolford, who thought this was just another test since the snake had bitten him before and everything turned out fine. He assured everyone he didn't need medical assistance, although his condition started quickly deteriorating. His friends couldn't take it anymore and got Mac hospitalized by force. However, neither the medics nor the man's faith managed to save his life. Remember that being near poisonous animals, let alone holding them in your hands, is highly dangerous. In addition, in the pastor's case, this situation endangered not only him, but also the believers of his church. However, I know stories where deaths were so paradoxical that it almost looked like karma caught up with those who'd been trying to evade punishment. 1980. Michael Anderson Godwin was found guilty of murdering 24-year-old Mary Elizabeth Room and was sentenced to death by the electric chair. However, in 1983, his death sentence was changed to a life sentence. Yet, Michael didn't manage to escape his fate. One day, Godwin was sitting on a metal toilet in his cell and trying to repair a set of headphones plugged into a TV. Of course, the prisoner didn't have any tools on him, so he took the wire into his mouth and tried to bite it in half. Iron is an excellent conductor, so the electric current instantly passed through Michael's body, damaging his organs. So, the prisoner ended up dying in an electric chair after all. It's just that the chair was quite unusual. Still, although these criminals deserved punishment, in the following stories, people suffered at a moment that was important to them, purely by coincidence. December of 1794, Honolulu, Hawaii. John Kendrick, an experienced sea captain, arrived at the islands on his ship called Lady Washington. John was known for his expeditions to the Pacific Northwest, where he developed fur trade between this region, the Hawaiian Islands, China, and the United States. He was regarded as a leader, a patriot, and a hero since Kendrick had valiantly fought in the Revolutionary American War of Independence. Kendrick arrived in Honolulu to help the local chief fight off the invasion of his enemies. After defeating the invaders, the warriors decided to have a celebration. As a sign of victory and the support of the local dwellers, Kendrick commanded his team to solemnly fire his ship's cannons. Although this salute was actually in his honor, Kendrick didn't want to draw attention to himself. He decided to watch the spectacle from his cabin window during a breakfast with several officers. A British ship, Jackal, was also involved in the event and decided to keep up with the celebratory mood and give a salute as well. However, sadly, none of the crew checked the cannon's condition before firing. As it turned out, one of the guns was loaded with canister shot, a type of ammunition used to hit the enemy. Another second, and a deadly strike was headed toward Lady Washington. It hit Kendrick's cabin, killing the captain along with everyone who'd been dining with him. It's a paradox of some sort. The man who'd faced death so many times in battle and during dangerous sea voyages died from a salute in his honor. That's why checking all equipment before using it is so important. Yet sometimes death can happen due to natural reasons, although not exactly at the right time. June 5th, 1971, USA. Another recording of the Dick Cavett Show was underway. It was an old TV show where the anchor invited celebrities and influential people to the studio. That day's guest, however, was extra special. His name was Jerome Rodale. He wasn't a politician or an actor. Jerome was a popular guru of longevity and a healthy lifestyle. The man was 72 years old, and he was in great shape. Sitting in a studio before a crowd of viewers, Rodale looked energetic and lively, and his positive attitude was infectious. Jerome joked, "I'm in such good health that I fell down a long flight of stairs yesterday and I laughed all the way." The man also claimed he decided to live to be 100 and said he'd never felt better in his life. After finishing his interview, Rodale calmly sat on an armchair near another guest, and the men continued discussing health. Suddenly, Rodale's head got yanked back, and he made a sound similar to snoring. For a second, everything looked like a prank, and reportedly, the anchor even asked half-jokingly, "Are we boring you, Mr. Rodale?" However, then his face grew serious, and he shouted, "Is there a doctor in the room?" But it was too late. As it turned out, Rodale had suffered a deadly heart attack right in the middle of filming an interview about his longevity secrets. That episode never aired, and it's not the only entertainment show with a sad ending. April 6th, 1992. Highway near Needles, California. Sam Kinison was driving to perform at a casino at Riverside Resort in Laughlin, Nevada. Sam was a stand-up comedian, and his career took off after switching from a minister to an entertainer with controversial performances. Sometimes he resorted to offensive jokes that touched upon women and the LGBTQ+ community. Sam was one of the people who could be either adored or hated. His performances often caused simultaneous waves of laughter and outrage. For example, in his monologues, he'd sometimes mention drunk driving. We don't want to drink and drive, but there's no other way to get the fucking car back to the house. Then, fate pulled a bad prank on him. On his way to the gig, Kinison hit a pickup truck driven by an inebriated 17-year-old. The scene was littered with beer cans from the truck, which added some tragic irony to the incident. Despite some visible wounding, Kinison's condition seemed stable at first. He got out of his car and sat by the wayside. "Why now?" he kept saying. These were his last words. The autopsy showed that his neck was dislocated, and his aorta and other blood vessels were torn. It's up to everyone's own conscience whether to engage in black humor. However, the ban on drunk driving is the law. What bizarre, paradoxical, or karmic life events have you witnessed? Share them in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more unbelievable real-life stories.